Welcome to today's Wonder at Home webinar entitled Resiliency at Home from Hurricane Katrina to COVID-19. I'm Laura Scaramella, the director of the Norton School of Family and Consumer Sciences. I am here today with my colleagues from our Family Studies and Human Development Department. We decided to make things easy on all of you and only include our faculty with the first name Melissa. I'd like to introduce you to Melissa Barnett, Melissa Curran, and Melissa Delgado. They are all associate professors in family studies. Today's webinar is focused on families. Families are the foundation of our communities and our society. Our scientists are committed to working with community members to tackle the most pressing issues facing families today. From natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina to the current COVID-19 pandemic, families across the globe are facing unprecedented challenges, including economic hardship, lack of access to educational resources for children, and the potential for family conflict. Today, our panelists share insights on how families are struggling with the pandemic and offer strategies for families to thrive during these trying times. Before beginning, let me describe the format of our session. We will begin with a short 7 to 8 minute presentation by each of our panelists. After each panelist is finished, we will answer questions that you submitted at registration. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A function. We will answer as many questions as we can, and we'll wrap up with any final thoughts from our panelists. Let's get started. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Melissa Curran. She will be talking about romantic relationships and major stressors.
Great. I'm Melissa Curran, the first of the Melissas that Laura introduced us to. Romantic relationships under stress, or presenting Zoom presentations from your home under stress. So I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about some really interesting stuff. All right, so about me personally, I'm going to start with that, and then I'll share with you some really interesting news headlines specific to romantic relationships and COVID. I'll talk to you about some really great research that we're doing specific to romantic relationships under stress, and then I'll conclude with, so what's in it for you? What have you hopefully learned today that's of interest? All right, so about me personally, why do I study romantic relationships? So I'll start with this wedding photo. This is me and my husband, Dan. He's a great husband. Feel really fortunate to be married to him. Been married for 19 years. 19 years. And I feel very fortunate that what I study professionally, I'm also able to use in my romantic relationship. You can imagine that comes in really handy. Similarly, I've had great role models of committed romantic partnerships. So this is my parents who've been married for 46 years, my grandparents who were married over 50 years, and my great-grandparents who were married for 50 years. So you can think about the hardships that each set of couples has gone through over time and how those relationships stayed committed over time. Always really reassuring to know. All right, so transitioning then from why romantic relationships to those news headlines. So I'll share 2 with you. The first one is staying happily married when you're both working at home. So I saw this one and I thought so many people are thinking about this right now, right? This is definitely something on folks' the radar right now compared to pre-COVID. Similarly, can your relationship survive the togetherness of a pandemic? Here are 11 things couples therapists recommend. So interesting, right? If I was clicking through or reading this in print, I would definitely want to know more. So then what can I, as a relationship scientist, tell you in terms of romantic relationships under stress? So what do we know? What can I share with you? So this is the working model that I've used. And so this is how can we use relationship maintenance strategies to explain and predict relationship commitment. So this latter construct is defined as being together for the long haul. And then the former construct is defined as actions that both members of the romantic couple can take to sustain and improve their relationship. All right, so this is going to be our model for the rest of my talk today. So hanging on to that model, I want to specifically talk to you about a construct called relational sacrifices. And this is one type of relationship maintenance. And so basically how these are characterized as is conflicts of interest or disagreements between partners. Y'all, you can definitely think of these, right? And so when we've done daily diary research. So like, for example, ask both members of the couple. So like once a day for 7 days, once a day for 14 days. Have you and your partner had a conflict of interest or a disagreement on things like finances, childcare, household chores, sex, affection, diet and exercise, time with family, time with friends? So we ask both members of the couple, and as you can imagine, there's lots of varied responses. We get high frequency data across these various questions. And really interestingly, one thing that we have found from this research is that one choice that can emerge, given these conflicts of interest or these disagreements, is that one person can choose to forego their immediate self-interest for their partner. And you might hear that and be like, really? That doesn't seem like a good idea at all. Let me give you an example, okay? So Las Vegas is opening back up, right? Especially y'all who are in the Southwest. This was big news, right? So my husband gets a call from his friend, and his friend says, Dan, let's go to Las Vegas. I've got a great room. I've got a buffet voucher. And so Dan's thinking tables, gambling, winning, although y'all, no one wins in Las Vegas, right? And he's imagining these food vouchers, right? So if you were to ask him on this 1 to 7 scale, Dan, how excited are you? 1, not at all. 7, very much. So go to Las Vegas, my husband would say a 7, right? He would be very interested. And then if you were to ask me as his relational partner, Melissa, how interested are you in Dan going to Las Vegas? Y'all, my answer is a 1. I'm not envisioning tables or winning or food. I'm envisioning crowds, lack of social distancing, no mask. This is very stressful for me. So Dan's a 7, I'm a 1. We definitely have a conflict of interest. So what happened? What occurred for me? Good news for Dan, good news for me, good news for our relationship. As Dan lets his friend know, I can't go. Melissa doesn't feel comfortable with me going, I can't go. Such an important sacrifice decision. So what does it mean? How does it spill over into my relationship, into our relationship? First, I seek the care and concern that my husband is willing to demonstrate for me. Second, I'm seeing that he is thinking about outcomes that are beyond himself. Third, I feel really committed to him. I'm thinking we are really, really in it for the long haul. All right, so maybe your interest is perked, right? Let me tell you a couple more things here. Okay, so the first thing that you might be asking is, okay, so you talked to me about these relational sacrifices. How often do I have to do these? Such a good and important question, right? Great news. Our research suggests not frequently, not as frequently as folks would imagine, which is good news. When to choose is the more relevant question. So when, if you are going to choose these sacrifices, should you choose them? And our research shows this, that timing matters. Timing is everything. So our research suggests that if you do decide to choose these relational sacrifices, you should choose them on days when you have fewer versus more daily stressors. So let me tell you a little bit more about these daily stressors. So just as they sound like, right? Daily stressors are these minor everyday hassles that are considered taxing as they drain the needed resources, right? So y'all think about the high daily stress days that you've had, like COVID, non-COVID combined, right? So like, let's say, for example, like this is my day. Like today I have experienced the following. I am working from home and my screen share doesn't work, right? That is really stressful. It could also be that you're working from home, you're on a call with your boss, and then like, you're so worried your kids will interrupt, your dog will start barking, your cat will jump up on your laptop, your Amazon delivery person will ring the doorbell and the dogs will go crazy. Oh my gosh, that's just number 1, right? You're grocery shopping, you're at the store, not everyone is wearing masks, this really freaks you out. You're at work, like done with your call with your boss, and then you're like, what did I do today? Did I get anything done, right? And then you're thinking, oh my gosh, what am I making for dinner tonight? Did I get everything I needed? Do I have to go back to the grocery store? Y'all, that is a high daily stress day, okay? A high daily stress day. Fortunately for us, we're also fortunate to have these low daily stress days. This might mean 0 of those stressors or maybe just 1 or 2. So in comparison to that high stress day, much better. So now how can I bring this all together with you? What can I tell you about sacrifices? What can I tell you about hassles? What can I tell you about commitment? So here is what I want to share with y'all now. All right. So here's what we found. When we combine high hassle days and folks choosing to sacrifice, literally commitment makes no difference. We see no change, no slope increase for commitment. There's literally nothing that changes. So the takeaway here is you're better off on these high hassle days, like the one that I just described with the 4 stressors. Don't sacrifice. Think about yourself. It's totally okay. In comparison, are you having a less stressful day? Whether it's the 3rd day of the week, the 7th day of the week, no problem. That is your day then to make that sacrifice. Choose that day to think beyond yourself, to think about your partner. What we find so interestingly and so importantly is that on those less stressful days when folks choose to sacrifice, it is on those days when we actually see feelings of daily commitment increase, slopes increase. Oh, love this study so much. It just makes me so glad and reassured to hear this. All right, and then one more question that I want to ask of y'all for you to think about with me. So might COVID-19, a stressor for so many of us, right? And who knows how long it's going to last? Who knows what else will occur? might COVID be an opportunity for relational growth? And you might hear that and be like, that's a crazy question to ask. But as a relationship scientist, thinking about the research that we've done in this area, I would lean towards saying yes. And so I'll briefly give you one example here. So in research with couples following the 2007-2008 economic recession, which was so stressful for so many of us, the greater use of relationship maintenance, which could include those relational sacrifices that I just talked about, it actually helped couples experience higher commitment. Love this, love this. This makes me really feel reassured to know about that. It's a big sample, representative sample, so this is reassuring for us as relationship scientists to know and to share with y'all. Okay, so what's in it for you? Hopefully, what have you learned? What's of interest today? So are you stressed today? No problem. Focus on yourself today. Don't worry about your partner. You're totally fine just thinking about you. Me time. Are you less stressed another day? Those will come, right? It's hard to think about that now, but those will come, right? So choose that day, that less stressful day to sacrifice for your partner, because we'll hope to expect to see commitment. Commitment should increase. And then finally, COVID-19 might definitely be an added stressor, right? But we also know from our research that it might also be an opportunity to strengthen your relationship. All right, so that's the end for me. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. So next, I am going to introduce Dr. Melissa Delgado.
Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today. The focus of my presentation is on the risk and resilience of Latinx youth. My presentation focuses on three main points. I'm going to tell you a bit about the Latinx youth population in the US, about two risk factors they experience, and about their resilience. Youth of Latin American or Latin Caribbean descent in the US, to whom I will refer as Latinx in this presentation, are the youngest major racial ethnic group in the US, of which 94% are US born. Latinx youth also account for the racial ethnic group with the largest percentage increase in US public schools in recent years, which means they also represent a growing segment of the nation's future workforce. Current trends indicate that by 2060, nearly 1/3 of the nation's workforce will be Latinx. Thus, how Latinx youth fare is critical to the nation's social and economic well-being. However, compared to non-Latinx youth, Latinx adolescents in the US are at elevated risk for experiencing depressive symptoms and engaging in risky behaviors. And whereas Latinx individuals make up 18% of the US total population, only 7% are employed in STEM fields, fields like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Despite the disparities, I also recognize the majority of Latinx youth do well. Growing up in Nogales, Arizona, a robust community consisting of a majority Latinx population, in which, for example, 95% of its students graduate high school compared to the state average of 78%, this was my personal experience. As a scientist, I was given a term to make sense of differences in Latinx youth developmental outcomes, the healthy immigrant paradox. What we have learned from the smaller immigrant portion of the Latinx child and adolescent population is that the more acculturated the Latinx group becomes, meaning that the more this group becomes well-versed in the English language and immersed in the US mainstream culture, over time and across generations, their developmental outcomes are less optimal than for newcomers. In other words, it has consistently been documented that newcomers fare better than Latinx youth who have been in the US longer, for generations. This is what we know as the healthy immigrant paradox. Being a scientist means we are inquisitive, and as a scholar, this is what I wonder. I wonder, what is it about the US context that puts Latinx youth at risk? Let's take a moment to wonder together. Have you ever wondered what it's like to not be able to get a job? Or have you ever wondered what it's like to not be able to feed your kids? Or have you ever wondered if consistently people told you you were not good enough, or having people say demeaning things to you all of the time, what that would be like? Two of the risk factors I have examined in my work around these types of questions are ethnic discrimination and economic hardship. In my work on ethnic discrimination, I find that early adolescents in 7th grade who experience ethnic discrimination experience high levels of depressive symptoms over time into early adulthood, 8 years later. My work on family economic hardship also demonstrates its links to youth adjustment and highlights adolescents' cognitive capacities that allow them to be aware of their family's economic hardship, as well as to the quality of their relationships with their moms and dads. Being aware of their family economic hardship, for example, or understanding that their moms and dads are upset or worried because they do not have enough money to pay for things matters in links to Latinx youth well-being, including school performance, risky behaviors, and depressive symptoms. I'll note that my work includes both mothers and fathers, as the majority of Latinx youth live in two-parent households, and as fathers are usually neglected in work focusing on child outcomes. In fact, it's the relationship with fathers that led to links in all indicators of adjustments in the slide you see here. Then we have COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic is magnifying these experiences. For example, the US Latinx population is more likely than Americans overall to say they or someone in their household has experienced a pay cut or lost their job because of the coronavirus outbreak. This is aside from the fact that Latinx individuals are less likely to be tested and treated for COVID-19, but more likely to experience serious illness once infected. What is important to highlight is that my work on such risks intentionally focuses on the resilience process. What we tend to think is that if you come from a place of trauma, tough things happening to you when you're a kid, then tough things are going to happen to you when you grow up. But this isn't always the case. In trying to understand what are the buffers of risk, or what protects Latinx youth from ethnic discrimination, for example, I turn to the family. I'm sure you've seen in the media, on TV, large Latinx communities, or these communities are so close, maybe you think they're too close. Have you ever wondered what it means to be that close to your family? These are the core values upon which I draw to examine the resilience process. That family closeness provides the foundation for resilience. I'll tell you about how this works in the educational setting. In one of my recent studies, I examined mother and father modeling in education in the context of the stressors that Latinx youth experience. To this end, have you ever wondered what it would be like to not know what it's like to go to college as a parent, but still try to instill these values in your child? I found that mother and father modeling, or that teens learn by observing and receiving direct instruction from their moms and dads in education, serves to promote academic self-efficacy. What do we mean by academic self-efficacy? This is the belief of having the ability to succeed in academic tasks. In turn, academic self-efficacy significantly predicts school performance in math and science. As in this study, my work has focused on the individual level assets of youth and families. But our body of work has yet to move from putting the onus on the individuals experiencing risk factors to the contexts that facilitate risk. To this end, my colleague Dr. Nair and I are trying to address part of this gap, focusing on the role of schools in an ongoing project. And in line with this work, we are currently seeking funding to help us better understand the implications of COVID-19 on schools and school experiences. What are the takeaways here? Latinx youth matter for the social and economic well-being of the US. The immigrant paradox tells us we need to better address risk factors in the US, which are further being magnified by COVID-19. Latinx youth have individual and family assets from which we can draw. We need to better address the role of institutions outside of the family, such as schools, and we need to keep wondering. In a study recently published in Perspectives of Psychological Science, the authors queried over 26,000 empirical articles from 1974 to 2018 in various top-tier psychological journals. And that what they find is that in the past 5 decades, studies that highlight race or ethnicity are rare to non-existent. Therefore, there is much more work to be done. Work on the Latinx population remains quite small compared to work with white youth. We need to keep wondering and better address the needs of the Latinx population, which in turn helps the US society as a whole. Thank you. Next, my colleague, Dr. Melissa Barnett, is going to tell us about her work on caring for young children during the coronavirus pandemic.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm really glad to be here today as part of this panel. And my research really focuses on early childhood, which is generally infancy up through about age 5 or kindergarten. And in many ways, young children are often missing from the public dialogues about the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. And maybe this is because their infection and hospitalization rates are low, and they're not missing out on publicly acknowledged important milestones like high school graduation. They're not losing their jobs. Yet we know young children really are being affected by the pandemic because their parents and other caregivers are in fact greatly impacted. So my goal here today is to really review from a large body of literature 2 things that we really know all young children need to thrive. And then I'll discuss how the coronavirus pandemic may be threatening these things, and finally end by just very briefly offering some recommendations. So we know that child development, including brain development, really happens because of those everyday interactions and relationships that young children are having. And in particular, we know that all children need opportunities to engage in supportive, responsive, sensitive interactions. What do those interactions look like? Well, you can see from some of these pictures, they involve eye contact, they involve warmth and affection. The adult is following the child's lead. That can be using language, that can be in play. There is a comfortable back and forth. And emotional and physical engagement between the caregiver and the child. And there's something universal about these kinds of interactions that our human brains early in life need to develop the foundation that then helps us learn and grow and has implications across the lifespan. Unfortunately, we know that during the pandemic, it can be challenging for parents and caregivers to maintain these supportive relationships. I can speak from personal experience, for example, as the parent of a young child who's been working from home for the past few months, that it can be difficult some days to balance being supportive and responsive and warm all the time while simultaneously juggling work responsibilities. We also know that, similar to what Melissa Curran discussed, that we're all having a lot of high daily stressor days during the pandemic. And on those days when maybe you shouldn't make relational sacrifices for your partner, you still need to parent. And it may be particularly challenging to be supportive and warm on those days. And then, pertinent to what Melissa Delgado discussed, a number of families now are experiencing concerns related to income loss, job loss. Parents are really worrying, how am I going to be able to feed my family, pay my bills, stay in our home? And in fact, we know one of the most powerful ways that economic hardship impacts young children is the negative effects it has on their parents and their parents' parenting behaviors. But the good and the bad news here is that it doesn't all rely on parents, that the old cliche about it takes a village to raise a child is true. We know that children benefit from multiple and consistent supportive opportunities with a number of adults and caregivers. In the work that my colleagues and I do, we focus in particular on 2 groups. First of all, grandparents. We know that the quality of grandparent-grandchild relationships can have really important positive benefits for young children. And secondly, early childhood educators also play a really significant role. In fact, more than 60% of young children are in out-of-home childcare of some sort. And so these childcare teachers also have opportunities to engage in supportive relationships with children. Really critically, in our research and the work of others, we've shown that these relationships with others like grandparents and early childhood educators can actually buffer children or protect them or make sure that they are able to be resilient and still have these positive outcomes, even when parents may be struggling to be regularly having those supportive, positive interactions. Yet we know with the coronavirus pandemic, of course, many families are reducing or cutting off contacts with grandparents because they may be in higher health risk categories. And many early childhood education centers have closed and many may remain closed. The second thing that we know young children really need to thrive is predictability and stability. And this is really comprised of 2 things. So first of all, it's predictable rules and expectations for behavior. So the idea that the child knows the rules and knows there are developmentally appropriate consequences for not following those rules and rewards for complying and following the rules. And those are consistent. And secondly, family stability and family routines. So things like meal times and bedtimes, when they occur, the behaviors that happen before and after. And we know when children experience that kind of predictability and stability, they actually develop the skills that help them learn to control their own behaviors and emotions. And clearly those kinds of self-control and self-regulation skills are critically important to be successful in school and to be successful in all kinds of relationships. But again, the coronavirus pandemic makes it challenging for parents to be predictable and have stable family routines. If you think about it, for many families, school helped organize the day. Or thinking about morning routines were very much related to what time did you need to get parents and children out the door to get to work and to childcare, and then working backwards from there, everything that had to happen before that could take place. Without these kinds of routines, while parents are also experiencing the uncertainty that's stressful to all of us related to the pandemic, children may be lacking some of that predictability and stability that they need. Taken together, what this really means is that this caregiver support and stability that may be most critical and yet most threatened for children exposed to high stress, like many children in many families are these days. So very briefly then, what are some recommendations? Number one, during the pandemic and beyond the pandemic, we really need to find ways to help caregivers to be supportive, to be able to consistently engage in those supportive and sensitive interactions. For employers, this may mean allowing more flexibility in jobs. At the community level, it means making sure that parents have access to the resources, that economic, food, healthcare resources that they need to be able to be supportive with their children. It means that parents and children need to have a sense of stability and a sense of control. So even when we may lack some of those external things like school or work routines to organize our day, we need to think about how we can develop within families our own routines so that children can have this predictable rhythm to their days. We also perhaps need to be creative about how we can build those connections to others. So one example could be to have a video chat, a FaceTime, or a Zoom babysitting session with a grandparent. This would work for kids who are 3 and older. And it's an opportunity for the grandparent and the grandchild to build that independent relationship on the video chat, which is actually really good for both generations. And it also provides an opportunity for the parent to take a breath, make dinner, take care of a work task. And so again, we may need to be more creative, but we need to remember how important these connections are for children and for their parents. There has been a lot of attention lately to the idea if we want parents to be able to return to work, we have to consider how children are going to be in safe caregiving environments. Overall, if we want to help children, if we want to make sure that all young children thrive, we really need to think about how we can make sure their caregivers, especially their parents, can thrive. And I look forward to talking more about some of these recommendations during the Q&A, but for right now, I'm going to turn it back to Laura.
Thank you, Melissa. Our panelists today have highlighted some of the challenges facing families during the COVID-19 pandemic. Family financial strain, relationship strain, and parenting strain are common stressors that occur during and after disasters, including natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina. In 2005, I was a faculty member at the University of New Orleans and experienced Hurricane Katrina. At the time, I had just finished a study of parenting and family relationships among low-income families with toddler and preschool-age children. All of the families were living in New Orleans. 6 months after Hurricane Katrina, I recruited more families into the study. Unique to Hurricane Katrina was the extensive damage to families' homes, and so it was very typical to have grandparents, aunts and uncles, and cousins living together in the same home. Mothers in my study who had more adults living in their home actually experienced less depression, used more warm parenting practices, and had children who were better adjusted. But natural disasters have a defined event with a clear recovery period. This COVID-19 pandemic is unique in that we are still in the midst of the crisis, and no one really knows how and when this crisis will end. This uncertainty is an added stressor for both our personal lives and our work lives. The presentations today clearly highlight the importance of investing time in our family relationships for our own mental health and well-being. Our family relationships are essential for us not only to survive this pandemic, but to thrive. So thank you, all of you. We're now going to move to the question and answer phase. And the first two questions are actually for Melissa Delgado. So Dr. Delgado, you mentioned the term Latinx. Can you define what Latinx is again?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Laura. So Latinx refers to groups from Latin America and Latin Caribbean countries. This is a term that stems from the terminology Hispanic was the first term used in the U.S. Census back in the Nixon era. And then this was to refer to those people that came from Spanish-speaking countries or that had origins in Spanish-speaking countries. Then that term was modified to the use of Latino to include folks that came from other non-speaking Spanish countries, such as Brazil and Belize, and also folks from Mexico, so Central and South America. But however, Latino is a Spanish term. It comes from Latinoamericano, which Spanish is a gendered language. So in order to be more inclusive in the US, we're using now the term Latinx. In other countries outside of the US that speak Spanish-speaking countries, they're using the term Latine with an E at the end because the X is difficult to pronounce in Spanish. So in the US, to be more inclusive, we're using the term Latinx.
Okay. And then how can Latinx parents work with their children's teachers to help them address some of the challenges you described? Are there organizations that can serve as resources?
Great. So what I think is that parents should ensure that they are advocating for resources for their children. This can start with school selection, paying attention to the diversity of the teacher and student body. That could be one thing. Establishing clear lines of communication with teachers and principals at their school. But also, I'd like to make the point with this question that it's important that schools are not putting the onus on parents or families. Many schools and teachers define, for example, parental involvement in a very traditional US way. So if parents attend parent-teacher conferences or don't attend parent-teacher conferences, they're seen as being not involved. But there are other ways in which they are being involved. And so really, it's important for schools and school districts to do more on their end on what they can do. And here's where I'm going to plug Dr. Nair and our work, because we are happy to help school districts and schools with professional development. And if you need that or if you need advice, please reach out to us.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this one is for Dr. Curran and Dr. Barnett. A lot of what you described is happening in my life. I can say it's happening in my life. My relationship with my wife, my children, there's a lot of stress in all of these areas. How do I know where to start addressing my situations first? What do I start with? So how about Melissa Curran?
That's such a great question, y'all, right? Especially because, what is the end point? How long is this going to continue? So I love that question. So I think I would start with thinking the good news is we have these, we know COVID's going on, right? We know that. We're aware of this. It's a global pandemic. But we also each have days, right? So some days are going to be really stressful. You're not going to be able to do very much. But the good news is there's another day or a third day or a fourth day or a fifth day. So I think literally as we're figuring out this new normal and how to survive and as Laura said, how to thrive, I think it literally is okay to be today I can't do it. Today was just too stressful, right? For example, my husband's already knowing there's not gonna be a lot of sacrifices today, right? I am tired from here, for example, right? So, but tomorrow is another day, right? The third day is another day. So if you need that time for yourself, see if you can do that. Maybe it can't be the whole day, because Melissa Barnett said, you still have your children in the home, but maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 15 minutes. But I think it's really important for people to think, I need some time, whatever that time is, and you negotiate that, you try to figure that out, right? I think that's so meaningful. And especially I think for women and moms, I think very often there's the idea that we should be caregiving, we should be helping, we should be maintaining, we should be doing emotion work. And that's all good, but at the same time, it can't be done all the time. So thinking about yourself, what your needs are, what you can get done, even if it's not ideally like a week at the spa, right? Because the spas are not open. But what can you do for yourself? Thinking about yourself, and then thinking about how those reservoirs are built up, those resources are built up. Then how can you then do the caregiving that that your family needs in whatever capacity? Melissa Barnett, what would you add?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I agree completely. I do think when we think about parenting, we know from a lot of research that one of the best predictors of the quality of parent-child interactions is the parent's own mental health and well-being. So really, again, thinking about it, and I know Laura has used the analogy, when you're on a plane, they say, put your own oxygen mask on first and then assist the child. And so really thinking about that. And then I also think another thing that we know is really help boost the quality of parenting is social support. And I think so that's related to your relationship with your partner, pertinent to what Melissa Curran was just talking about. But then also one of the challenging parts of COVID for all of us, right, is that we're spending less time with other people. And so really thinking about how you can make some of those connections. And I understand for busy parents, like, oh, this is one more thing I need to do is, show up for the Zoom happy hour or, talk to other parents. But we do know that you're not alone. Parents are feeling a lot of the same stressors. So really finding ways to connect with those other parents to see if, do they have some strategies that you could maybe try out with your kids? Do you have some strategies that you could help them with? And I'll also say we know that, even very young infants are really good at picking up on the emotional experiences of their parents. So if you're feeling really anxious, and you're feeling, your kids are picking up on that. So again, this goes back to why you really need to think about what are some things that you can do to protect your own well-being. And ultimately, that's going to really benefit your children and your other relationships.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on this. I don't know if I'm supposed to be answering the questions because I'm a moderator, but I think this pandemic is giving us time in different ways. And so we no longer, I for one, don't have to commute to work. I don't have to commute home from work. And so there's little pockets of time that are now available that weren't available. So I can tell you we've done Zoom happy hours with our faculty, especially the faculty with children. And it's super helpful just to have a little bit of time to vent. It's okay if the kids are watching TV. It's okay if you're relying on these other resources. But I've also found that my husband and I actually have coffee at 6 o'clock in the morning because it's cooler outside. And I wouldn't say it's cool right now, but it's cooler. And it's 30 minutes that we can have for each other. And so I think it's just taking advantage of those time opportunities.
I love that. So I'm going to add to very, very,
okay.
but I love, Laura, what you just said, because I do think it's true. Like, I think a lot of times we think this has to be like I said, like a week at the spa, and that would be wonderful. But if you can't do that, like, how do you literally find pockets of time that will benefit you individually, benefit you relationally, benefit you in terms of parenting, in terms of intergenerational relationships? I think it's literally figuring out how can I be benefited and nourished and flourish with the pockets of time that are available. And if you can't do it today, y'all, good news, there's always tomorrow. You can't do it that day, there's 7 days in the week. You can't do it that first week, there's the 8th day, right? So there's always more time. Like, give yourself the benefit of the doubt, give yourself time, give yourself compassion. It's so important in general and even more relevant and needed now.
And adding on that, don't expect perfection. I mean, we're allowed to be human. So, okay. So, Melissa Curran, you've kind of talked on this, but how do you recommend that I open dialogue with my spouse?
Yeah. So I think this is a great question, right? So when we teach close relationships and do research on close relationships, it seems like communication should be the easiest thing. Y'all, it is not that easy, right? There's lots of ways that there can be interference. There's lots of things that get in the way, your own feelings, how your partner's doing. But I think you should communicate right now, what do I need, right? Like, right now, I need 15 minutes, right? I know it's just 15 minutes. Like, I need to go walk outside while there's still shade, like Laura's talking about, right? And then maybe you feel better about that. Like maybe then you have that built up reservoir, right? So again, I think it's thinking about like, what do you need? What's going to most benefit you? And I think to think about it in terms of spillover. So not only, because I think what happens is there's a lot of gender socialization, right? At least in terms of like Western society and heterosexual relationships. A lot of it is that like women are supposed to give and give and give some more, right? And especially when parenting comes into play, I think there's a bigger expectation of that. Like there's huge differences between the sexes in terms of parenting and household duties, right? Melissa Barnett could speak more to that than me. So the whole idea here is that do what you can, knowing that it will fill you up, but it'll have spillover benefits into your family system, however your family system is comprised. Like maybe you're nicer to your dog that day. Maybe you're nicer to your neighbors on the walk that day. Those are all good things, right? Because it's hopefully like reciprocal. So yeah, do what you can, take what you can. If you can't do it today, y'all, there's always tomorrow. Isn't there like a play about that? The sun will come out tomorrow. Y'all think that, right? Think that. We all have to think about that. Like anything we can do to get us through today. If today was crappy or terrible or stressful, it's really okay because so many of us are having those days too. What can you do tomorrow or the third day or the 7th day or the 14th day?
Gotcha. Okay. So Melissa Barnett, this one is for you. How do stressors on families differ by geography, say rural versus urban versus suburban?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So some of my work has focused on rural families. And I think we know outside of the pandemic that there may be some differences in the rural context. So for example, we've looked at multi-generational families and multi-generational support networks. And families that live in rural areas may be particularly dependent on grandparents for a variety of supports, including childcare. And that's because, again, outside of the pandemic, there just may be less availability of childcare and flexible childcare. So then zooming forward to now during the pandemic, when there may be real concerns about having interactions with older adults, you can think about the real, perhaps additional burden that families in rural areas are facing as the really difficult decisions. Do I go to work and leave my children with my parents, knowing that this may be putting my parents at risk? I mean, that's a really significant stressor. Do I not use my parents for childcare? And then what am I going to do because I still may need to go to work? I may be an essential worker, for example. We also know more broadly that there are often greater health disparities. So there may be a less healthy population in rural areas because of lower access to healthcare, that therefore may be more vulnerable to the virus itself, which then has ripple effects across other family members. And so again, like Melissa Delgado said in her presentation, in many ways, COVID is magnifying what were existing disparities in our society.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. I'm going to skip to a question that's in the Q&A, and this is from an attendee. I find myself getting more and more agitated and annoyed with my 3 and 5-year-old nowadays. To add to that, I have to keep explaining ourselves to my family and our friends on why me and my husband, choose to send our kids to daycare during this pandemic. I feel like I'm being guilt-tripped as a result, falling more into depression. Do you have any advice on how to handle my work and kids and stress that comes with feeling helpless?
I'm going to start. Give yourself compassion, right? Literally, like give yourself degrees of freedom and compassion. And like if you need to cry and vent, call me. I'm super glad to talk. But literally, like this is hard. Like it is so hard for everyone. Your situation is really hard. Whatever you can do to give yourself some compassion and degrees of freedom, please do that. It's just so necessary and needed, especially because we don't know the end date. Like, who knows what's going to happen? Like, there's so much uncertainty and so much that's unknown. So whatever you can do to get those pockets of time, you deserve those and you need those. That's so awesome.
Melissa Barnett, can you talk a little bit about daycare?
About childcare? Yeah, we do know that the licensed childcare facilities that are open now are following really strict CDC guidelines to keep children and the teachers themselves safe. And again, so sort of thinking about then what's this kind of hierarchy of your needs in your family. If you know you have a safe place as safe as can be these days for your children to go and where they're getting opportunities for those supportive relationships, and that allows you to do other really important things you need to do, like work, then that's okay. And really thinking about needing to balance and the quality of those relationships that child is probably those children are getting if it's a high quality center, really has benefits in terms of their behavior. So then when they come home to you, you may be better able to manage their behavior as well. And so I think back to what Melissa Curran said, really thinking about compassion and really thinking about you need to do what's best for your family. And sometimes those multi-generational, those extended family bonds are terrific, but they can also be bonds that restrict a little bit in terms of then needing to navigate what do you need to do that's best for your family.
Okay. We have another question in the Q&A related to this. What suggestions do you have for single parents who are working at home with young children? How does one create space and time if there's no family that can help with childcare during this pandemic? This is one I think a lot of us have experienced. Even if you're not a single parent, sometimes one parent is working away from the house, one person is working in the house. So it is really a broad issue, and it is a challenging situation. Melissa, Barnett, do you want to, and I think Melissa Delgado, you would have some to add to this too.
Yeah, that is such a hard question. And again, personal, not as a single parent, but personally, I sort of grapple with that. How do you, I think you do the best that you can. So this goes back to the earlier question. And so we know, although the accumulation of these supportive, positive interactions are really important for kids, it doesn't mean that every interaction that you have with them has to be that way. And really thinking about how you can adapt to your, good parenting is adaptive parenting. So you may not be parenting the way you were before the pandemic, and that's probably okay. So for example, many parents, I know, were doing this and then feeling really guilty about it, having more screen time for kids, because that may be, as long as you're choosing, age appropriate, educational kinds of things for them to be viewing, that's okay. And maybe that's how you're creating space to be able to do things on your own. I think, depending on how old your kids are there ways that you maybe can kind of pool together with other parents, even if you're not having direct contact? So thinking about, can your kids get together for sort of video chats if you have that kind of access, and entertain each other essentially while both kind of sets of parents are able to also get something done. So again, really thinking about what can you do with the resources that you have now that we are in the pandemic, even though these are things that you maybe wouldn't have thought to do or didn't need to do before the pandemic.
And I know I wasn't called on, but I want to add something here. So one of the things we teach our students is attachment theory, which I love so much. And so the whole idea about attachment theory is that, for these repeated, pervasive, consistent interactions, you develop models of self, like, am I worthy of love, and will other people support you? So think about all the years you've already been doing that really well, right? So your kid or child, they probably have a model of self where they're like, I am deserving of love. They know that, the box is checked, right? And then the other thing is are there others who will support me? So even if it can't be like you all the time, every day, every single day, they know that others will support them. So I think all the time that you have spent caregiving and raising and nurturing your children, that doesn't get erased because of the pandemic, right? It doesn't get erased because of a couple bad days. So I think that's also really important to think of. You literally have built a foundation for your child, and that child is living on that foundation. So all of that buildup, all of that time is hugely meaningful. They're hugely meaningful. And on average, children are very resistant. We know this from the divorce literature, the military deployed literature. And again, Laura and Melissa Barnett can speak more to that. But you have done a lot already. It will not all cave because of COVID. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. There's lots of science to support that cross-culturally.
Okay, let's let Melissa Delgado.
So I'll combine a little bit of my thoughts on this and the previous question. I think that going back to what the other Melissas have already said, it's really important to have compassion for yourself and to give permission to step outside of those boundaries that you're used to, because we are not in a typical time, and we have to make what we can do with what we have available and what we can. And I think Melissa Curran, Melissa Barnett spoke gave great points on how to do that in particular. In terms of schools broadly, I know that the previous question was on childcare. We also have to think of those individuals, family, young kids who are not in safe spaces right now. And so I know that sometimes we ask this question about whether or not schools should reopen. And this is a difficult question to answer. I do think that we need to think of those individuals, though, that do need a place to be to remain safe. And those are, and so we have to do everything in our power to make sure that we provide those safe spaces for our children.
Thank you. Good answer, Melissa. All right, so it's time to wrap up. So I'm going to start with Melissa Barnett, go to Melissa Curran, and then to Melissa Delgado about some final thoughts. 30 seconds. Melissa Barnett.
So again, this idea, if we really want to support young children, support their caregivers. And if you are a caregiver of young children, really reach out to others, even if they can't physically be there. What are some ways they can help you do this adaptive parenting? Parenting during a pandemic may not look like it will before or after, but really think about how you can best meet the needs of your individual children.
Yeah, great advice. I would say what I concluded in that slide, like really, if you're stressed out, you can't do it today, y'all, just focus on yourself as much time as you can. It's totally worth it. It's totally needed. And science supports it, okay? So lots of good reasons to take care of yourself. The second one is think about your partner. You know, we haven't done research on parenting, but think about your partner on days when you have that reservoir. It doesn't have to be frequent. It doesn't have to be like renting an air balloon in Ecuador. It can literally be the things that Laura talked about, like 30 days, 30 minutes with coffee. So important. And then finally, like we're going to be in this for the long haul. So what can you do to like work on your relationship, to find joy in your relationship, like to find these moments? Like we didn't talk about this during the presentation, but like when can you take time to find like appreciation or gratitude for your partner? Those are so important, right? So again, those can be like minute things or 2-minute things. They don't have to be all day at like a meditation retreat. They can literally be small things that you can do on days that work for you.
As far as my final thoughts, I'm going to take it back to some of the takeaway key points here that I had is that COVID-19 is magnifying risk experiences or experiences with risk factors. With ethnic minority population, of course, we've seen many instances of racism and discrimination. We have to do more to address this outside of the family unit or those folks that are having these experiences, and really get at more of the anti-racist work that white folks need to do to better address these issues.
All right. And I just want to thank everyone for coming today. We have lots of exciting research that's happening in our Family Studies and Human Development Department, the Francis McClelland Institute for Children, Youth, and Families. I'm very grateful for our panel of experts for talking today. And if you would like any additional information, please don't hesitate to contact me. I can put you in touch with any one of these Melissas. And thank you very much.